Hey, so I'm kind of mad because the audio apparently in the video of this chapter that I was trying to post from earlier today, it says the audio is having a hard time being processed or something, which I don't know why, but it's having a hard time being uploaded to YouTube, so I just decided that I will reread it, even though, I don't know, I liked it the first time around, but whatever. Anyway, so having to reread it. Alright, this is called A Small Visitor. One afternoon, Oswald was standing around the cash register talking with Roy when Roy suddenly picked up a pencil, pretended to be writing something, and said, "Don't look now, but that little girl I was telling you about is back." The first time Roy had seen the little girl was a few weeks before, and then it was only the top of a small blonde head slowly rising up, appearing in the side window, when two big wide blue eyes staring back at Jack. Then two big wide blue eyes staring in at Jack, running up on his plastic wheel and ringing his bells. But the minute she saw Roy, she quickly disappeared from sight. Roy walked back and went outside, but by the time he got around to the side of the building, she was nowhere to be seen. He had noticed her only a few times, but it was always the same. As soon as she saw him looking at her, she disappeared into thin air. The next time she came in, he was able to catch sight of her before she saw him. He quickly turned his back and pretended not to notice her. From what he had seen of her, she was a pretty little thing, and was clearly shy and afraid of people, but obviously fascinated with the bird. She came every day after that, and Roy got a big kick out of it. "Who is she?" asked Oswald, not turning around. "I don't know. I've asked Francis and Dottie, but nobody knows who she is or where she came from. I just wish I could get her to come in." As the days went by, the little girl became bolder and bolder, until one afternoon when Roy opened the back door, she did not run away. "Don't you want to come inside?" he said. He can't come out, but you can come in, and you can pet him if you want. He doesn't mind." Roy, seeing how small she was, guessed the girl could not have been more than 5 or 6. She was barefoot and wearing a dirty, ripped cotton dress, and she stood there, clearly torn between being terrified of Roy and wanting to see Jack up close. "Come on in," he said. "Nobody's going to hurt you." The girl started to turn around to leave, but Roy said, "Wait a minute, don't go," and went back in and picked Jack up and held his feet between his forefinger and thumb and walked to the door so she could see him. "Look, you can call him if you want. He's tame. He won't hurt you." Jack looked at her through the screen and sang out, "Chip, chip, chip, birdie, birdie, birdie." After a moment, the girl could not resist and slowly began to move toward the door. It was then Roy noticed that there was something wrong with her. As she came closer and closer, he could see that her body was slightly twisted, and she was dragging her right leg behind her. "What's your name?" he asked when she came in, with her eyes never leaving Jack. She answered, "Patsy," so softly he could barely hear her. "Well, Patsy, this is Jack." It had been Roy's experience that at first most children this young were afraid to touch the bird, but not her. She might have been frightened of people, but not of Jack. She said, "Can I hold him?" "Sure." She lifted her finger and held it up, and Jack walked from Roy's finger over to hers and sat there, cocking his head and blinking his eyes. Usually in the past, when he had put Jack on someone else's finger, he had always hopped right back onto him. Not this time. "He likes you," said Roy. Her eyes were wide with wonder. "He does?" she said. "Oh, yes." At that point, Jack bobbed up and down her finger and walked all the way up her arm, sat on her shoulder, and nuzzled against the side of her cheek. "Well, I'll be darned," said Roy. This was the beginning of the love affair between Jack and Patsy. When Patsy left the store that first day, Roy walked out and watched where she was headed. He finally figured out where she lived and why nobody in town knew who she was. She had headed in the same direction as where those people who lived way back up in the woods were located. She probably belonged to the same family as the 2 mean boys who had shot Jack in the first place, and most likely had heard about the bird from them. He remembered the first day she had appeared was the same day that he had seen those boys walk by the store and look in at Jack. What a shame, thought Roy. He could just imagine what kind of life she had. But all he could do was be as nice as possible to her while she was there. The kind of people who lived back there in the woods never stayed long anyway, or never stayed anywhere long. They were mostly itinerant farmers, farm workers, passing through the area to pick strawberries or work the pecan crop and then move on to the next place. After that, the girl came back to the store every day and played with Jack for hours. She was still terrified of people and shy with Roy, although he found she was no trouble to have around. She was as quiet as a mouse. The only time he ever heard her at all was when she was alone in the office with Jack. If he happened to pass by, he could hear her in there, just chattering away to the bird, and darn if that bird wasn't chattering back at her. He would have loved to hear what she was saying, but he just couldn't make it out. As the weeks went by, she got to the point to where she would come out of the office and talk to people. When Roy first introduced her to Oswald, who was not very comfortable around children, he awkwardly reached down and shook her hand and said, "Hello, little girl, how do you do?" and was amazed at her tiny hand. As she walked away and he saw how badly crippled she was, he turned to Roy and said softly, "That's a damn shame. She's such a pretty little kid, too." Roy glanced back as she went into the office. "Yeah, it makes you want to kick the living tar out of somebody, don't it?" The next time Oswald came up to the store, he saw Patsy in the back, and she shyly motioned for him to come over. "Do you want to know a secret?" she asked. "Why, yes, I do." She then motioned for him to lean down and whispered in his ear, "Jack is my best friend." "Really?" he said, pretending to be astonished. "How do you know?" he whispered back. "He told me." "He did? And what did you say?" "I told him first, and then he told me." "I see. But he said I could tell you." "Well, tell him I said thank you." "Okay," she said. When he walked over to the cash register, he was laughing to himself. "Hey, Roy, did you know she's back there talking to that bird?" "Oh, yes, I hear her all day just chattering away, lost in her own world. But you know what? Considering what she must go home to every night, the kid probably needs some magic in her life. She can stay back there forever as far as I'm concerned." Of course, when Frances and the other woman saw the girl, they were appalled, not only at her condition, but at how thin and dirty she was. Butch Manich got mad and fumed over it. He had no patience with that kind of child neglect. Being a process server, he had dealt firsthand with the type of people that lived back in the woods and knew what they were like. He said, "They treat their kids worse than you and I would treat a dog." From then on, every time Frances went into the store, the sight of the girl broke her heart. She told Roy, "I'm just worried to death about her." And you probably wonder what her mother must be like, to let a crippled child roam around like some wild animal. Somebody ought to do something. "I know, Frances," said Roy, shaking his head. "I've tried to feed her, but she won't take a thing from me but a few pieces of candy. All she wants to do is play with Jack all day, and I feel bad for her. But she doesn't belong to us, and there's nothing we can do about it."